So just to let you know, I'm going to start
Recording
doing
in
that.
progress.
Record.
Recording stopped.
So, Christian, hi, good to see you. I'm recording just to let you know. Hey, good morning. So I'm going to start, but I guess I want to make sure that I'm asking you all. Oh, good. Yay. So many good mornings. Good to see you all. Good. And once we get to know each other more, I will have our cats join us. So, were there any problems with the Canvas page? Are there any problems that I should know about? Please let me know. Any problems with the reading? Any problems accessing anything? Right? Okay, good. I'm trying to be really attentive, and please let me know. I'm going to show my screen. Hey, Zane, nice to see you. You're in the classroom? Yeah, cool. I'm going to share my screen yes. Oh, thank you for let me try that again.
Recording
again.
in progress. Recording stopped.
Oh, all right. Yeah, that would be great. Thank you. Yeah. And then we can get going, and because I will do this again and again and again, and eventually I'll learn how to record. Thank you. Thanks. Great. Thanks so much. Thanks. Thanks, Mike. Thanks, everybody. All right. So let me share my screen. Okay, so I'm sharing my screen, and this is also on Canvas, so you should be able to see the PowerPoint that I'm also showing to you. And what I want to do is I want to start by talking about reading, which sounds like a little silly thing to do at the beginning of a university class, but I think it's a really good idea to introduce ourselves a little with a discussion about reading, because in university classes and in other classes you take, you do a lot of assigned reading, and there's a lot of different ways to read. And it wasn't until graduate school that actually I got told that there were different ways to read. In fact, I just thought there was one way to read, which is that you opened up the text and you started reading. So I'm going to stop my screen share so that I can see you all again, right? And I want to just talk about and introduce ourselves to a little bit each other. What are the many ways to read? It sounds like a silly question, but what are the many ways to read? Yeah, Leslie, please just go right ahead.
Close reading, so really looking at specific details.
Yep, absolutely. Right. So the close reading, right? And Leslie, when would you do a close reading? Why would you do it?
For me and my experiences with close reading, maybe to if it's more literary, maybe to use to look up the specific language that was used to refer to something, and maybe like how it reflects the time period, and that's from a literary, or it could also be from like historical textbooks.
Yeah, I really like that, right? Right, to do a close reading. And Sergey, you're saying read out loud. Yeah, I love that, right? That's a great way. Yeah, that's another way. What are some other ways to read? Yep. Yep. I highly encourage it. In fact, you would be surprised how many faculty do quick skims, right? Skimming, I like to say skimming is not a sin, right? And in fact, it is highly encouraged to be like, what the frack is this, right? What is up with this before you get into it? And what does this require of me? And before I get into it, right? So skimming is encouraged, right? Before just what else? What other kind of, do I want to read this aloud? Do I want to read this closely? What other kind of readings are there? What other ways of reading are there? Yeah, please, Lily.
I think it kind of goes along with close reading, but like reading to answer specific questions in the text. Like if you get an assignment and you know, I need to read this piece and it's saying, look for these 5, answer these 5 questions based on the reading, like looking for those answers specifically.
Yes, please. Right. I call that mercenary reading. Right. There's no standing going after what you want, right? So going in for something that you want, right? I do it all the time, right? And sometimes I say to myself, I am not interested in the marshmallows. I am interested in the, I don't know, the peanuts or something, right? I'm going looking for something, right? That's great. What are other ways to read? Mike, yeah. Yeah. And I find it keeps me awake, right? Especially if a reading is a snooze, right? Right? Anything else? What are some other great ways to read? Zane, Leo, are there other ways that you read? Zane. Oh, we can't hear you, Zane. Oh, can you type it in the chat, Zane? I'm sorry. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Reading out loud, audiobooks, reading in my head. Yep, Zane's typing in the chat, which is another way we can read. Yep. Yeah. Sorry, Zane, I called on you and then Yep. But I take notes when I read so that I can process the info. Yep, exactly. Yep, absolutely. Eddie says skimming and then reading specific paragraphs that caught my eye. Yep, absolutely. Yep. Eddie, I also like to read the first 3 paragraphs and the last 3. Yep. And then kind of figure out what you're going to do, right? And kind of to put another one out the other way, right? Leo says, I like to follow along an audiobook or read out loud alongside actual reading the text. Ooh, Leo, I really like that. That's super creative. Yeah, I really like that. It's really stimulating. Yep. Jesse says, annotating whilst you read. Yes, exactly. I love that, right? Right, Kelvin, I kind of sing the words in a melody to keep myself actively reading it. Oh, I love that. Yes. Yeah. These are all ways to kind of read, right? And I think the reason why I'm bringing it up is because in this class, and I'm sure you've encountered this in other classes, is that as you can see, right, I have not used a textbook, right? And I have not used a single text. And so there are pros and cons of this. And the con of this is that we will be encountering different texts. It's like different types of road, right? Kind of constantly, right? It's not like we have one text or a couple of texts, and once we get used to the text, we kind of know what we're getting into. Every different reading we pick up will kind of be different, right? So that's kind of a downer, right? But in another sense, I like variety, and so it's kind of a upper. But what it requires of you is to do all of these kind of, I don't know, testings out of how are you going to read or listen to, because some of the texts are audio, right? How are you going to approach this task, right? This reading, right? And the last thing I kind of want to say about reading is that I have worked really hard to not overwhelm ourselves with reading each week, precisely because I want us to read really closely the reading, right? So I've tried to err on the side of quality instead of quantity, so that we will actually do the reading and talk about it, right? Versus like a whole bunch of reading that we don't really talk about it. So that's a whole bunch of reasons why I wanted to talk about the reading, and to actually say that there are so many different ways to read. And I encourage you to kind of ask me about the reading, and kind of ask me if the reading doesn't make sense. Hey, why'd you pick this one? Right? Or, hey, this reading was hard, or, hey, I didn't kind of get what the point was about this reading, right? So that we're actively kind of talking about that. Okay, so that's kind of a way to kind of get us going today. Again, I'm going to share my screen so that we can think about what I've got kind of going on here with the PowerPoint. You're reading this really short excerpt by Richard Kagan, right? This is the really short reading for this week. And the short reading this week is Richard Kagan's explanation of how the Spanish imagined their cities in the Americas, or how cities in the Spanish Empire are supposed to work. And on Monday, I put up these two terms of civitas and urbs, and then I didn't really talk about it. And so in response to Isabel's question of what is my definition of the city, or what are we doing this week, is what I'm doing this week is I'm setting up the framework for the rest of the quarter. We are using this week to understand how Spanish colonizers defined the city, right? And what I'm saying in this week is that our definition of the city this week is certainly not the definition that we're going to use throughout the rest of the quarter. In fact, we're going to use the rest of the quarter to kind of show that this definition of the city didn't really work, right? So we're setting up the colonizer's vision to test whether or not this Spanish interpretation or claim or argument or hypothesis of the city maybe didn't work. So the Spanish are arguing that a good, powerful, and worthy city was defined by the urbs and the civitas. And these are the Spanish who would conquer and invade the Americas and Asia and define the city. So the Spanish are defining, right? And here, let me see if I can move right. The Spanish are defining that a city or a town had certain characteristics, such as street, walls, a church, and qualities of construction, which are constituted the urbs, right? And these were envisioned as straight streets laid out in a grid with a central or main plaza at the center. And the Spanish defined what was inside the grid, or the grid itself, as the traza, right? So let me put in the chat, right, what I'm kind of talking about, right? So the Spanish are going to define that the grid itself is the traza, or kind of what is inside this grid, as the city, the construction of the city itself. And the people or the members of the city are the civitas or the populace or the human and political community that constituted the city or the town. Now, this should not be surprising to those of you who have studied kind of ancient European history. The Spanish get their ideas from the Roman world, and they express this in late medieval and early modern European Renaissance idea of the physical location of the city and the membership of the city from a very European and Renaissance idea of what is supposed to work together. The urbs and the civitas are supposed to work together in the Spanish idea of the 16th, 17th, and 18th century cities. They're really immersed, the Spanish are, in this Western idea of the Renaissance, of the Western European Renaissance, right here. And let me make sure I'm kind of showing this picture. And so the Spanish philosophers and intellectuals are describing how the urbs or the structure of their city is supposed to communicate the nobility of the populace. And given that the Renaissance is when the Western Europeans between the 15th and the 16th century are working to revive and suppress ideas and achievements of classical Greek and Roman antiquities, Spanish colonizers who came to the Americas very much are having these images or models of the ideals or what is supposed to be a perfect city. And this is an image that I am showing you. This is the Renaissance ideal of Florence in Italy, where humanists of the period attempted to explain or argue that a city required artistry and monumentality, right? So a city was supposed to be nobly designed with palaces and squares and hospitals and churches and convents, and that this structure, so this is how urbs and civitas is supposed to work together, is supposed to produce industrious, noble, and virtuous citizens, right? So this is how this is supposed to work together. If a city had clean, broad streets, then it would follow, right, that the inhabitants were also prosperous and elevated, right? So in this image, scholars have suggested that these, and again, this is an idea, right? This is an ideal. Scholars have suggested that the idea was to communicate a series of concentric circles. So if you look really closely, and it took me a while to kind of see this, right? But maybe I'm not as smart as all of the humanist Renaissance scholars. You're supposed to see walls and castle turrets and then mountains. You're supposed to see kind of circles of enclosing the city. And then there's a chain around the city that's supposed to refer to the chain of law that Florence humanists deemed essential to the city's unity, binding its municipal citizens together in ways that the more fractious ties of friendship, kinship, and parentage could not, right? So my point here is that the plans that the Spanish would make for their cities, right, these beautiful colored plans, right, that Kagan is showing us, right, in the beginning of his short little piece, that the Spanish would make for their cities in the Americas and Asia were really these Renaissance visions of European cities that expressed an intention of a Spanish city. So in many ways, you could kind of see that this is kind of a vision or an ideal or a plan, right? I guess my question for you is, does this plan seem hokey? Goofy?
It feels like artificial control.
Ah, Thomas, yeah, tell me more. Tell us more.
Well, it's like And even kind of true today that the governments feel like they can maintain control just through the structuring and the order of everything without actually doing anything for the citizens to improve their actual lifestyles. It just looks nice, and they're kind of settling at that. Even if it doesn't even match the maps, which it says in the reading, that the maps were more blueprints than they were accurate to what they actually look like.
Very nice. Very nice. Yeah. Does anyone want to comment on what Thomas said?
Yeah, and also I think it's also looking at like look at how we think our society today is. So it's so much more equal. You have that freedom of opportunity, and then you think, well, back when they're doing this in the 15th, 16th centuries, the power disparities look so much larger when you have, the peasants versus the nobles, and it makes complete sense that the nobility are trying to design this to make the working people that they might see as inferior or lazy or whatever, making them more like us. We'll give our characteristics to them by exerting our control and power over them, and they have no say in any of how the city's designed or where they're forced to live or any of that.
Sergey, please. Yes.
I was going to say that this kind of also unrealistic and also probably really bad for even the environment as it goes on. If you think about from the gridded point of view that, making a straight road through a mountain, for example, completely detrimental for the environment in the long term, because if you have to build around your geographical area and location rather than, hey, we got to put a highway through this, mountain range or through this forest because it's a straight line now.
And we're all living in it, right? Right. And Christian's actually driving through it right now, right? Yeah. Leslie.
It feels very reminiscent of modern day gentrification. It's very much wanting to change a scenery in order to impose some sort of ideal onto other people without really considering the pre-existing cultures, and it's its own image of commerce without considering what is already there.
Totally. Yeah. Jesse. Yeah.
So this kind of reminds me of the novel The Giver. They tried to create a utopian society, which ultimately backfired because you're essentially stripping people of what's naturally meant for them, and you're trying to put this sort of like control over them. But ultimately, it's going to be a faulty plan in the end. If anybody has ever read that novel, how it ends up.
Yeah. And here we go, right? So let me just go right to a kind of next, my next kind of point here, if I can share my screen. And if I could kind of keep going, those were excellent points. Yes, exactly. The Iberian city was also a legal and military construction, right? In the late 15th century and into the 16th century, the Spanish were really constituted as much as they were Christian Iberians as much as Muslim Iberians, right? And since 700 AD, much of the Iberian Peninsula had been part of the large Mediterranean Muslim world. And, right, instead of calling it kind of Spain, right, it was known as Al-Andalus and eventually unified under the Caliphate of Cordoba. Both are pictured here. I'm giving you these different kind of maps, right, incorporated into the commercial networks that extended from the Mediterranean into the Indian Ocean. And what I really kind of want to emphasize here that's really not in Kagan or in Rama, and we can talk about that on Friday, why it's not, Islamic rule was characteristically urban. Islamic cities of Spain included today in what is today Seville, Granada, Cordoba, and Toledo, right? And if you go to Spain today, you can kind of see these Muslim urban influences very much. The Spanish who joined the conquering and invading forces into the Americas and Asia were primarily from the southern regions of Iberia, including Seville and Granada. As a result, their expectations of the city came from their experiences of cosmopolitan Muslim Mediterranean cities. And it was these cities, I would argue, and other scholars join me, that taught the Spanish another model in addition to this European, Western European one, of an extraordinary global metropolitan center that was Islamic. For example, Seville, during the Muslim rule, was known for its impressive architecture, its abundance of neighborhood mosques that marked residential areas, complex irrigation systems that supported an effective administration and taxation structure, enhanced by famous artisanal guilds that worked in ceramics and metals. Located on a navigable river, allowed for prosperous trade, and the Muslim city, by law, incorporated Christian and Jewish communities who lived as dhimmi, or resident non-Muslims with special protected status, limited internal autonomy, and a special tax burden. And what I'm showing here in this image are images of the Royal Alcazar, right? The royal the royal palace, which you could go to and visit today, and also they've done a lot of different kind of filming. This is the Spanish, and this is where the Spanish learned the architectural design of interior patios. So a lot of this kind of Spanish-American architecture that we associate with Spain, I would really argue is Muslim Spain, or part of the Muslim Mediterranean world. After a brief unity under the Caliphate, the peninsula deteriorated into sectarian factionalism, and Christian armies began to move out from the northern fringes, the northern part of Spain, what is today Spain, where they retained hold. So from the 9th century onwards, this is kind of my second point about thinking about Iberia as Muslim before and during the conquest of the Americas. The Iberian Christian kingdoms engaged in a protracted warfare against Muslim Iberian rulers. In the 13th century, the warring Christian kings of Aragon, Castile, and Navarre joined to defeat the Almohadas, and the last Islamic kingdom on the Iberian Peninsula, Granada, fell to Castile, and I'm going to emphasize this. So the last Islamic kingdom in Islamic Spain fell to Christian Castile and many of you know this, in 1492, right? And many of us know that the date of 1492 is when Christopher Columbus had his, he bumped into some islands in the Caribbean, and is part of our understanding of the racial hierarchy of Spanish colonization, right? So first the Spanish Christian Iberian was divided into these multiple Iberian kingdoms that you can see here, and could only make erratic inroads into the richer, more organized, powerful Muslim caliphate to the south. So following Roman practice, the Christian rulers, as they're trying to push to the south, only took possession in pieces of outposts of the Muslim Iberians, this is the critical point, by founding towns. Far from any Christian rulers, the towns were granted certain charters or fueros, right? And I'm going to put this in the chat. Fueros, right? Which guaranteed that the town's inhabitants had the right of self-government. So in other words, right, as the Christian Iberians are attempting to push into Muslim Iberia, they are using towns as tools of conquest, and the towns and the residents could establish a municipal council. Then they had the right to rule themselves without oversight of a monarch, right? This is what's really critical to the rest of the kind of study of the Americas. So that's part of the kind of story of the town as a tool of conquest. The other part of the story of the town as a tool of conquest is to think about that when Christian Iberians then established these new conquering cities, right? And this is happening kind of 900, 300, 1400, 1492, they are attempting to contain, and here let me move myself so y'all can see it, right? They're attempting to contain their enemies with these conquering towns, and their enemy are conquered Iberian Muslims. So the cities of Christian Spain, therefore, before the conquest of the Americas, before the conquest of the Philippines, like many medieval European cities, were exceptionally segregated. Anyone who is not Christian, who is Muslim or Jewish, could not be a member of Christian Spanish city council. Jewish communities and Muslim communities in Spanish cities of this era were assigned to particular parishes or neighborhoods, right? And the wars of Iberian conquest had created a need or desire of the Spanish to contain, and you all have kind of thought about this already in kind of our discussion, to police physical relationships, making distinct religious groups have distinct legal statuses. Castilian monarchs issued laws during this time, right, prohibiting sexual relations between Christians and non-Christians, often under penalty of death. Because it was difficult to tell, especially in southern Spain, where Muslim, Jewish, and Christian communities had lived together for many centuries, authorities often called for insignias or special clothing to designate the different communities. Finally, in Spain, Muslim and Jewish communities were expected to convert to Christianity, resulting in rampant anti-Semitic and Islamophobic attacks. And these start to happen in the 1300s into the 1400s. Iberian Christian Conversion Project that gained steam in the 14th and into the 15th century would contribute to the demise of Muslim and Jewish communities on the peninsula. And in 1492, again, this critical date, the remaining Jews of Castile were forced to convert or leave. And in 1501, Castilian Muslims had to follow suit. Now, the reason why I'm showing you this is an image made by a German traveler. His name is Christoph Wilentz, and it's a drawing as Muslim women, a woman, man, and their daughter, and they're identified in the text as Moriscos, and this term meant Muslims who had converted to Christianity. Now, this family is from Granada, right? And now I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop my share so I can see you, and you all can look at the image, right? You all can look at the image separately, right? Is that right? You don't have to kind of look at me, right? So this family is from Granada, and Wentz drew this image in 1529, right? But the Granada had been conquered by the Iberian Christians in 1492. So you all do the math for me, right? So this is, quote, a conquered Muslim kind of a family, right? And you can see in many ways that Wentz is communicating a curiosity with a conquered exotic group. The inscription above the woman and the girl reads, In this manner, the Morisco women of Granada dress in their house with their children. Now, by this time, the Christian Iberians are becoming frustrated with the people that they had conquered, right? They're getting a little kind of like, hey, get with the program. Why did these Moriscos, now converted, to continue to dress this way? Why did these Moriscos continue to bathe regularly, prepare their own food, use Arabic names, and speak their own languages? But actually, Muslim Iberians had adapted. These Moriscos that we're looking at in this drawing had actually converted to Christianity. And we can see that the women no longer covered their faces, but instead are using a wide mantle. That's why it's really interesting to kind of look at this image, that they're actually, this is our adapted Muslims who have converted to Christianity, right? They're Moriscos. They're no longer practicing Muslims, right? So this is how this, the city is being used as kind of a tool to purify the kind of the Iberian Spanish Empire as it moves south into the southern part of Spain. Now, if you kind of move to the next slide, I'll allow you all to move to the next slide and I'll keep looking at you, right? Because it's more fun to look at you than look at my slides, right? The purification of the Iberian Peninsula would carry into the Spanish conquest in the Americas. In the 1490s, the Spanish would found cities in the Caribbean, including Santo Domingo in the Dominican Republic. In the 1520s, they would found the cities in Mexico, the Aztec capital in Mexico, and they would build their cities on top of these indigenous cities. They would found their capital in the city of Lima. Therefore, what I'm suggesting here is that we need to think about how the city continued as a tool of conquest into the Americas. And how do we know that? Well, the Spanish actually talked about this really explicitly. I have many quotes. Pedro de Alvarado, the Spanish military invader who founded Antigua, the capital of Guatemala, in 1524, stated very clearly that he established, this is a quote, this Spanish city on top of this indigenous city, quote, for the better conquest and pacification of this land. And again, we have Spanish conquerors echoing this idea that the establishment of a city was a critical way to kind of mark the territory as their own. So let me pause here and maybe I'm kind of asking kind of just for some reflection about kind of how the city works transcontinentally, if that makes sense. Because we're doing a lot with a little bit of 20 minutes here, if that makes sense, right? I'm asking us to think, right, from 900 AD all the way to 1500. I'm asking us to think from Muslim Iberia to Central America, right? Does everyone kind of feel the big shift? I'm making a big kind of shift. And I'm asserting, right, that the Spanish felt and knew and operated and used the city as a tool of conquest. That's the claim that I'm making. I'm just kind of pausing, right, because I just kind of like,
Is it like the city kind of laid like a framework or like set of guidelines for that like future conquests that they would follow?
yeah, that I think that the Spanish who are the conquerors that we know as Hernan Cortez and Francisco Pizarro and all the kind of famous conquerors that we know that come to the Americas, that come to the Philippines, right? That this is what they have in mind. That this is one of the models. So Lily in her comment was kind of describing kind of a class distinction of what kind of models of cities do different classes of people have in mind. So the Crown has in mind this beautiful plan, right? But the conquerors on the ground are probably thinking of what I just described. Does that help kind of make sense of that? The Crown is issuing these beautiful colored plans, right? But actually who's executing the plan are military conquerors. And they're setting up towns as part of military invasions that have been happening in Spain since 900 AD. And the town has been used as a tool of a military invasion. The town has been used as the first foray. We're going to put the town here, right? And the town is going to kind of be the frontera, at the borderland. Leo. They may not be executing the plans as perfectly as the Crown wants, but they sure are executing people. Absolutely, Leo. Right. Or what I'm saying is that these beautiful plans can coexist too, and I'm saying this along with what, right, are coexisting with the tool of conquest, right? That the Crown is saying, this is the beautiful plan we have, and at the same time, the conquerors are establishing these cities, right, that are at the forefront of conquest. And those are happening at the same time. They're coexisting.
I never thought of like the building of cities as sort of I hadn't thought of it as like a tool of, you know, marking your territory, like established like as a pattern of conquest, but it makes complete sense because if you're a conquistador in Latin America and with this, you know, trying to find gold or whatever, and I mean, there's nothing more obviously saying like, hi, I'm in charge now, as destroying an indigenous city and building your own. Is sort of like, that's not how we do this here anymore. Like, it's such like a physical symbol of power. It makes complete sense.
And I think that the challenge that I'm presenting to you, right, is to, and I think that this is something that is really interesting, right, and I think that, and I'm presenting this to you, is to think of violence and beauty together, right? Is that right? So let me just make this, I'm going to kind of make a third move, right? So my first move was like, oh, the Renaissance city, the plan, right? And my second move was like, woo, this tool of conquest. And now let me make a third move, which was kind of I'm making a segue into what we're going to return to this on Friday. So it's going to be a little bit kind of unformed because it's moving into the Friday, right? This is the lettered city. This is Angel Rama, or Angel Rama, and we're going to really hit that hard on Friday, right? So here's my kind of third move, if you can want to watch that. In the Americas, the city was supposed to be an antidote to what the Spanish perceived to be an alien and invaded world of the indigenous people and enslaved Africans, right? The Spanish are afraid in the 16th century, right? And the 17th century and the 18th century and the 19th century, right? Right? They are invaders and they have done some very bad things. I'm right. They have invaded and built these cities and exploited these people. And then and in this context, right, to emphasize Isabel's question from Monday, right, what is the city for the Spanish? It is synonymous with civic order, justice, and religion, right? And the city is also supposed to create and maintain and prescribe order. And here I'm going to kind of, right, see if I can go to my PowerPoint fast enough. Here's the empire, right? Right. Well, that's not going to work. That a lot of what the Spanish are going to try to attempt is to prescribe order that was encapsulated in this insidious word of policia. In the legal documents and court cases and royal orders, the term is going to mean a certain kind of order and virtue, people who are living in Christian ways and who are living inside the city in peace and harmony and prosperity, right? This term is coming up in your readings. Are you living in policia? Means for the Spanish, are you living in, I'm going to use the word two ways, in urbane ways and in urban ways, right? Are you living inside the traza, inside the grid? And are you living in Christian ways inside the city? Now, those of you who speak Spanish, what does the term policia also evoke for you? Police. Thank you, Leo. Absolutely. Right? And I'm good at, and who do you think, and this is a rhetorical question, right? Who do you think the Spanish are going to be policing in their lettered city, right? They are the minority in their lettered city. Is everyone kind of following me here, right? They are the minority in their colonial cities of the Americas. And they are saying, we are the urbane. We are policia, right? We are Christian. We are bringing this to you. And with this urbanity, we intend, is everyone kind of following me, to police you, right? And who's the you? Well, it can be enslaved Africans, it can be indigenous people, but it could also be anybody else who does not follow, right, these rules of the city, right? But is everyone kind of following me there? It is the lettered city. It is beautiful. It is beautiful, right? It's a beautiful plan, but it is also built on conquest. Is everyone kind of right? Like, that is what I'm kind of setting up. Is everyone kind of setting up? So I'm going to end there, but I'm going to hang out here. So, right? So thus endeth the classes. And I'll see you on Friday in the Alp at 2:50 Right? And Mike, if you could stop recording, right? And I'll hang out. Thanks